Welcome back to day 82 of our chess journey to 1500 ELO on chess.com. Now just for a quick update here, it's been a couple of days since the last video, and tonight I finally slept, or last night rather, I finally slept in a bed for the first time in a week, which was great. Anyways, it's been a long day for me today. I've been up since about 7 and stuff's been going on all day. I've had quite long days lately, and it's been a lot of fun. It's currently 11:30 in the evening, so I'll just be recording a quick video before heading off to bed. So let's jump on into a game, guys. We get Enchakon from the UK. We'll play 1d4. It seems to me like it might be at least a couple of weeks until I'll have time to look at the Benoni. I don't know the Benoni. I was going to say until I get time to look at opening theory again, which I haven't done for a long time. Or in a long time, rather. I think I would like to learn the Benoni, I think, and that might involve taking the pawn, I think. Our opponent probably knows the theory here. They go here. And honestly, I don't know whether taking here was good or not. We could try to defend the pawn here by going bishop to e3, but it doesn't look pretty to me. So what do we do here then? Honestly, I would like to see how our opponent responds if we go bishop to e3, trying to hold on to the pawn here. But most likely I think a3 might be best, followed by b4 and grabbing space while kicking the knight back. So because my intuition here tells me this is probably a lot better, I think I'm inclined to go for this instead. I think our opponent has to take here, and they do. So let's just come up and kick the knight out. And I'm expecting this might not be 100% ideal for us. But honestly, I have never looked into any Benoni theory. I don't know if I've ever faced it before, so this might be an interesting little experiment here, having a quick look. A learning experience at the very least is what I was going to say. Bishop to b2 makes some sense here. Our opponent is going to fianchetto, and I think it might be a good idea trying to remove their strong bishop. We might have e3, but honestly I think I'd like to grab this diagonal before our opponent does so. Let's come out. How do they respond? I'm expecting bishop to g7. Queen to c2 might be a move at some point here. Just developing the queen, defending our bishop, and holding stuff together. But first of all, I'd like to look at some sort of castling maneuver, and I'm contemplating playing g3 here instead of e3, because this diagonal here currently looks quite juicy. It can't be easily blunted, I think, unless our opponent goes for e6 and d5, but then we can take the d5 pawn, I think. So let's have a quick look. I don't see any discoveries by this knight, so we should be safe in regards to playing g3. Preparing for bishop to g2. just quickly scanning for tactics, but I'm not seeing any, so I think this looks okay. We might see b6 here and bishop to b7, or we might see an immediate castle. We might just have a quadruple fianchetto game, which would be a bit funny, to be honest. A bit funny, but it wouldn't be the first time, I think. I don't think there is a d5 break. Then we just take. As I mentioned, I think b6 or castles should be our opponent's two primary moves here. I'm also thinking of whether I want this knight here on d2 or on c3. We get queen to c7. I think we can mirror their move and come up to c2 here, as I mentioned, defending our pawn, while simultaneously defending our bishop. We just have to make sure we don't open up discoveries by this knight, but the knight can't come forwards to hit our queen. So this makes sense to me. So let's come up and mirror their move. We could have played e3, but considering we want this diagonal here, we don't want to force our bishop to stay on this diagonal to defend this pawn. Then this makes a lot more sense to me. We might have had knight to d2 as well, but I would like to stay a bit more flexible for the time being. Castles or b6, but we get b5, which I guess is just another way of playing d, or b4 rather. Now our opponent here is taking advantage of the fact our queen is pinned. So honestly, I think we have to push our pawn. I didn't quite realize this, so it's honestly a bit unfortunate. However, I am realizing we might have knight to d2 here still. If they take, we can take with the queen even, and our knight now defends. This seems a lot better to me than pushing, because then our opponent will just keep on taking advantage of this pin towards our queen. So let's come up here. We will get out with a knight, and we develop one more piece. Now bishop to b7 might be a move. It would be slightly annoying, but hopefully we should find a way of dealing with it. It's simply just a mirror tactic of what we are doing against our opponent here, as I mentioned, trying to get rid of the strong fianchettoed bishop. I'm looking for knight maneuvers. This knight for our opponent can't jump forwards. How about this knight? We take it here, we take it if it goes here. I'm not seeing a threat here either. This doesn't do a whole lot. So currently the knights don't come with a lot of threats, but we will have to take an extra look at that as we advance here in this game, because suddenly the knights could become dangerous if we get into pin territory. Our opponent castles. I think we'll play bishop to g2 here. Because we need to get castled as quickly as possible too. What I'm currently doing here is I'm looking at our c4 pawn, thinking whether we have to deal with its positioning or not. I don't think we do, to be honest. It's a bit difficult to add extra pressure to this pawn. This knight can't get there easily. This knight can't either. This bishop is on the wrong square or color, and this bishop would have to go to a6, I guess. Which, well, that might actually be a move. Bishop to a6. But in that continuation, I think we have c5 as a follow-up. And then their bishop would be bad, and it would be blocking this a pawn as well. So we are neck and neck in terms of time management here. Our opponent does proceed to go for the move I was mentioning here, but as I said, I think we have c5. But let me just have a quick look at our position, because there might be other moves. Bishop to e5 does not work. It fails because of d6. This knight can't really reveal an attack on the rook, I think, either. Or could it? Where could it go? So let's say we go knight here. We threaten the rook. If they take with the pawn, we are good. If they move the rook, we take the knight. But that doesn't accomplish a whole lot. Not immediately. I think I might prefer playing up like this. But then our opponent's going to play d6, and then we can't come up with our knight. Well, our plan was going to d4 though, to hit this knight, which honestly doesn't work either, because as our opponent takes our knight here, they will be hitting our queen. So honestly, I think we might have to backpedal and go for this previous idea, c5. d6 is likely to be seen here. If we see d6, I think knight to b3 to defend the pawn. And if they take, we get a powerful outpost. But now our opponent comes down here, threatening some stuff against our queen. However, there should not really be a move here, a sacrifice on this square, I'm pretty sure. If we castle, and they take with the knight, we take with the pawn, and this does not seem promising for our opponent. So instead, let's castle first, and get our king to safety. As I mentioned here, our opponent's bishop is horrendously bad, but bishop to b7 and it's back in action. Here I think we might have an option of looking at bishop to e5 at some point, teaming up with our c5 pawn to create a threat against the queen, get a strong outpost, at least temporary, in our opponent's position, and maybe induce this move. But they do move the bishop up. What is our ideal approach here? I think first of all I'd like to get our rooks into the game. So let's have a look. I think the A rook on the C file and the F rook on the D file, steering down the board. But what I'm currently looking at though is whether we should move our knight first or not, which I don't think we should. might not be necessary. Instead, let's come up with this rook. I'm choosing this rook because I think we need to defend our queen first, because it's our most vulnerable piece because of the pin towards the pawn. Still, d6 can be played, and as I mentioned, we meet this move with knight to d3. If they take, the outpost looks juicy. We don't want to take because then we lose a rook. Because queen takes, and rook takes. Now I think rook f to d1 looks like a decent move. We could come up with our knight to d4 as well. And by our knight here, I mean this knight, but then we would end up trading bishops. This is played, just a somewhat annoying move by our opponent, pushing our queen around. Where do we go? Can't go here or here. I think d2 seems best, pressuring this. We won't be entirely out of threats here, or out of dangerous territory. But we are quite limited, as I mentioned, in terms of our moves available to us. Let's go d2. The f6 knight here can't reveal an attack against our queen, so this should be okay, I think. Those knights here have not moved yet, although they might do so at some point. Rook f to e8 here is likely to be played, d8 rather, followed by a capture on c5. So we might have to move our queen out of the way of that idea, or we might be in an awkward position. I would like to get our remaining rook into the game first though, so if our opponent does not come here, I'd like to play rook f to d1, and maybe we can get our queen to e1 for the time being, so it's not hit by all the rooks, or both of the rooks rather, but still it's not in an ideal spot right now. That's simply because we have allowed our opponent here to get a lot of pressure. Let me have a quick look. Because of our queen's new positioning, I think we might have ideas of c takes d6. Because now we don't have the queen on c2, but instead we have a 4 times protected rook, which can be replaced with another rook. So this looks somewhat optimistic to me. If rook takes, I think I like, or if rook takes, if rook to d1, or d8 rather, I think I like to meet the move with c takes d6. And if rook takes, I think we take the queen. And if they take, then we take this rook with a check. So currently our opponent is thinking. I would like to see d5, then our c pawn would become incredibly powerful. However, d5 seems unlikely. It would just weaken our opponent's position, although They could argue they would have a bishop outpost in the center of the board, but at that point we might as well just get it off the board, maybe moving this knight and hitting the bishop, for example, by playing knight to g5, trading off a pair of knights and a pair of bishops. And we would be left with a powerful pawn. It's honestly kind of fun here to see today we have an opponent who takes about as much time as we do. So we have an even match on the clock. However, I am too tired to calculate thoroughly here, so I'm not really utilizing the time perfectly. Instead, I have been talking because I can't quite get my brain to work right now, I'm realizing. Or well, honestly, I knew it already. It's been a long day, but part of making videos every day is you do it on the days where you don't have the excess energy as well. But it's been a lot of fun. Currently I'm going through what's similar to a freshman week, but it's a Norwegian variant, which I think at our immatriculation ceremony was translated to a buddy week. Simply what it is the second year students are showing the first year students around and hosting activities. Today we had a swing course, kind of dancing, and we had different kinds of games in the park. Last night we were having party games, etc., and we will be going to cabins, and we'll be traveling to islands, and there will be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it. Our opponent takes. Honestly, a bit surprised. But how about... Can we not just take with the knight? I think honestly taking with the knight is pretty much forced here. If they take with the knight, we take with a rook. Probably what our opponent is thinking here is they have an in-between move at some point here, going rook to d8, targeting our queen. Then I think queen to e3 might be a decent move, keeping our eyes on this, but it would leave this bishop a bit vulnerable. How about if the rook moves to d8, we could come back to c3 here. If this knight moves, we have checkmate. And we grab this c-file again, aided by this bishop on b2. Still, I'd like to get our f-rook into the game, but we would need free tempo to do that. A really strong move for us right now would probably be knight takes knight here on e6. Our opponent takes, then we take. Where does the queen go? I'm curious as to what our opponent has calculated here. Maybe teaming up with the bishop, perhaps. Going to b7. If queen to b7, I think we go rook f to c1. Staring down at our opponent's rook and likely trading material. We see queen to b6 instead, which honestly accomplishes a whole lot of the same stuff. However, there is one big difference. Now rook f to c1 this rook is not protected by the queen, so we do threaten to take the rook. However, they could play rook to d8 there, rook c to d8 rather, hitting our queen, and we might have a game ahead of us, which would be fun, honestly. I wouldn't mind. Do we have an immediate queen to c3 here? Okay, so what I'm thinking now is rook f to c1, rook d to e8, queen to c3, triple battery, we infiltrate, and our position looks quite strong there, to be honest. At least that's what I'm thinking. We have the battery down here, so the knight can't ever move. We have a triple stack, we are defended because of the bishop holding stuff together as well. So I think this looks quite promising. Still, this pawn here could become a weakness on b5. Will depend on the a pawn, of course, but it is not entirely unlikely to see that pawn moving. Now it's important to note here, if rook f to d8, we take the rook here, and we would have pinned the other rook. Our opponent takes here, which pretty much forces our hand. There might have been an argument for playing b takes, but I'm not entirely convinced, as our pawns would probably be more of a liability than a strength. Because with our opponent's remaining pieces, it might be difficult to prevent them from taking the pawns, instead of us using them as strengths. Now we do get this move, which I honestly expected here. I was intending to meet the move with queen to c3, but there is this check, so queen to c1 might be better. But queen to c1, and we have bishop to... No, they can't go there, because we can always block the check on the back rank with bishop to f1. We can't take on b5. That doesn't quite work. We do still have 5 minutes, so there is time to calculate stuff. Although, as I said, I'm honestly somewhat fried in my head today from a long day. But that might be the new normal for the next couple of weeks at least, because this buddy week thing lasts for 2 full weeks. And we do have normal stuff going on in the daytime as well. So it's pretty much non-stop stuff happening. It's tiring, but it's a lot of fun. But you might not see me playing the most accurate chess for the next couple of weeks. I won't jinx myself, but that might be the case. Okay, so which options do we have now? This bishop move, what does it accomplish? We get our bishop opened up. Do we have knight to d4 here? Knight to d4. Hitting the bishop, the pawn. That seems like a superficial move. It doesn't seem like it does a whole lot. Or a superficial threat, at least, is what it appears to be to me. Or is it? I realized we are actually threatening taking this pawn here. So after the bishop moves, we can actually take this pawn at the end of the line, and even do so with a threat against the queen, or tempo. Here, The bishop probably goes to e4, although they might go back to d6, in which case we will see what we do in response. Did I say d2? I think I might have said d2. I meant d7 at least, if this bishop comes back here. Still, we are pretty much neck and neck in terms of time management, or at least time remaining, which is quite fun to see. We don't often get those opponents who actually utilize their time, at least in a similar fashion that we typically do. Now this pawn here could obviously be defended by a6, but our opponent would not like to lose this bishop while simultaneously destroying their structure. And honestly, this is a double threat here as well, because we can take with the knight and then take with the rook. So those two pieces here coordinate quite well, I'd like to say. But I think we get this move. Is this a good move, or is it a bad move? Honestly, it's a bit difficult to tell. How do we go about calculating this? Knight takes, bishop takes probably. Then knight takes here, comes with a check, the king comes here. It's a bit funny here, I'm having troubles calculating lines for like 3 moves. First thought was rook takes on b5. But honestly, if we do take on b5, it's probably better for us rather to take with the knight, so we move out of harm's way. And then bishop takes, queen takes, rook d1 check, and we get pinned. Is it worth the 1 pawn? I don't think it is. I'd like to argue that is not sufficient compensation for a pawn. Or, I mean, it is sufficient compensation for a pawn, and the position does not look desirable for us. So let's take here instead. This bishop will take ours. And I think we just take the bishop here. Is what I calculated at least, because to take this knight, our opponent has to break apart the structure, which should leave us in a slightly advantageous position. We are down a bit on the clock. Hopefully that evens out. Bishop takes, queen takes. Seems forced. As I mentioned, we do probably have this in between move of knight takes. I think we'll be playing it simply because I realized we have another move in between. If king to f8, we check by taking the pawn on g6. So we get 2 pawns in the process. The queen will take, or it could take, but then the structure breaks apart. And I like the following position here. Now taking on b2 seems much more dangerous for our opponent. Our queen can come in here, the king will be forced out here, it just looks terrible. We will get checked on d1 and it's going to be annoying, we'll get pinned for a while, but our opponent has their own share of troubles as well. I think there shouldn't really be a move apart from rook to d1 here. Rook to d1 should be the only move that plays for an advantage, or it tries to play for an advantage at least. It's played. This is first. Now there might be knight takes on h2, but then I think we disregard our opponent's threat and create checkmating patterns against their king. Let's see, knight takes. Oh yeah, we just check and take the knight. We get this. Now let's calculate. Queen here. King comes here. How about rook up here? And then the king is stuck in the center of the board. No, the rook can't come here, it's defended by the knight. However, we could come to this square, forcing the rook back. Have a look at this quickly here. We'll come up here, either the king moves up, or the rook moves back, in which case they would have lost it, which we can have a look at afterwards. How about queen here? Setting up ideas of forcing queen trades, for example. I'm aware we are running low on time. Just wanted to make this move work, but the knight does not allow for it. So let's play like this instead. Oh no, we have this hanging. I realized this was a massive threat. There was a mate in 2. So we did have to defend our pawn. Still, knight takes here should be a possibility, but we'll see what we do in regards to that threat. If they do take, I think then we have this square. King is first to come out here. Check here perhaps. Yeah, it looks dire for our opponent if that transpires. So we are both sub 1 minute now. This is probably going to be a long video, but I'm having a lot of fun. We get this move. Our opponent wants a queen trade. Do we have an elegant way of declining? I don't think we do. Let's take. We'll come up. Now we threaten the b4 pawn. Rook to. Oh no, they just take. Well, that's anticlimactic. Oh, that's probably not even what I meant to say. But still, this looks like a winning endgame. We'll be playing knight and A rook and bishop versus a rook and knight, but we are up 2 pawns. We'll grab this pawn before it's defended, then drop our bishop back. I think f3 seems like a good square for the bishop. It would hit the knight squares, and then we can look at rook moves. A timely h4 should be nice. The knight moves before we get the chance to restrict it properly. Okay, this is all about speed now, so let's speed up. As I mentioned, h4, and then we'll see what we do about our rook. This seems to be the kind of position that's going to take a while to grind out, so I'll try to play a bit quickly so we don't lose on time. Our opponent pins themselves. I didn't quite calculate here, but this just seems like an intuitive move. To unpin, they would have to spend a lot of tempo. h4, just improving our position. I'd like to come up here, and we get this. Now we have 3 pawns against 1. I'm expecting f6 to be played. Although our opponent might want... yeah, they do go here. I was going to say they might want to come and break the pin, but they go here instead. Let's come back down to cut off those squares so the knight can't come back easily. Or it could come back, because if the knight goes to d5, we have to take the rook or we lose our own rook. I don't quite like our pawn structure here. And what I mean by that is I don't quite like how we have one backwards pawn like this. g4, I'm looking at maybe king to g3. We get this. Now our opponent wants to move the rook probably. Let's come up with the king. 14 seconds. Last move played with 4.4 seconds left on the clock. Just reminding myself, we are still playing a game of clocks here. If the knight moves, we always take the rook. But I don't expect the knight to move at all. That should be an instant loss. The rook moves instead. Let's move our bishop. We'll drop it back. Maybe f3 or f4. Our king defends the bishop. I think f4 here. e3 is a bit weak. it's immediately targeted. However, I think we'll just come on over and glue our position together. I want to keep our rook here for as long as possible to make it difficult for our opponent to play. The rook comes up again. Let's get our bishop out here. Outside of our pawn structure or our pawn chain. We are neck and neck in terms of time again. The king moves. I would like to come here and play bishop here perhaps. Knight still can't move. Rook can't move off of this file. We'll come here, defended by the king. King to c7. I think we go rook to f8. And then knight here, maybe rook to f7. Or actually, we have this. We can just be as annoying as possible because of our bishop positioning. We maintain the pin. And we'll just be annoying. But what is our move here? Maybe we just push. This will break our pawns apart. But g6 here, and our bishop holds the pawn. Then rook back here at some point to the 8th rank, and we should probably have a quick queen on the board. 5 seconds for our opponent. They are starting to get into time trouble. Here we just come up, keep on pushing the pawn. 2 seconds. Our opponent ran out of time. We pressured them on the clock today. Thanks for the game. It was a great game by our opponent. This was difficult to win, but we did so in the end. So far, the computer does not seem to think we made a lot of mistakes, but we'll see as we get in here. Maybe we had a lot of inaccuracies, for example. We did play with 89.5 and our opponent played with 84.3 today. We had 4 inaccuracies, and this was a really high level game apparently, which is always fun to play. I like it when we have high level games, simply because I think it helps me learn when we get tough opposition and manage to play correctly. Let's start our review. This was apparently a theory, but there was an alternative. This was blessed at least by the low depth engine. Still, as I mentioned, I don't quite know the Benoni. I just took the pawn here. I'm glad to see a3 was best, and my intuition was not wrong. Knight to c3 though was apparently a bit better, but because of g6 being played, we were allowed to play like this instead. I didn't consider knight or queen to b3 here, rather. c2 just seemed more natural to me. I don't quite know why, probably because a mirrored kind of move is quite common in the Sicilian, which I do play. And also, I guess the queen does not seem as active to me on this square as it does here, because it's got more mobility. Anyways, this was slightly inaccurate. We were not in a great position here, However, it was not a horrible position. Here we were back to equality. I didn't consider bishop to h3 here, although in hindsight it's always easy to say the move makes sense. It would have prevented our opponent from taking with the knight here, or with the pawn, I guess, because knight takes, and we take here. This was all good. Taking with the b pawn was best. I didn't like this, it seemed a bit scary. Although maybe, I guess, there might have been an argument we could cement the pawn on the c6 square, creating a permanent threat with our bishop defending the pawn. Still, I like to play with as few risks as possible. This made sense, and we just played solidly from here. This was a lucky find. We got this. Let's have a quick look at our alternatives. How about taking this pawn? Then we lose. Yeah, because we can't take this bishop with our queen, then we lose our knight. Or what? No, never mind. What am I missing? It is honestly takeable because of this, and this move. Wow, no, we would have never seen this in a million years. This is a bit too computerish. But here, apart from taking there, queen to a1 and bishop to d5 worked as well. Well, we did find the correct move, spent a bit of time though, a bit more than half our time. Let's go over to this review again, and this in-between move followed by this was great. Apparently taking here was better first. I was not convinced, but typically speaking the computer tends to, I won't quite say misevaluate kings being in the open, but they always find the best checkmating pattern or way of abusing a king being weak, which is not quite reflected by such a high number in human play, at least not in quick time formats, to my knowledge or from my experience. Took here instead then because we got a pawn. This was all good. Apparently we should have went for the other check. Let's just have a quick look here. King to e7. And this move, it was not a check, but it would have forced the king out. It's a bit scary, I guess, playing a non-check move in this kind of a position where we are under pressure as well. But I guess our opponent's king is just that weak, which does make sense. We played like this though, and we saw this. e3 was the top computer move. e4 as well, because now queen defends this either way. We took. Did we have an alternative though? Queen to e2, defending. And this was a fork. Was it? Not quite. Or maybe? How about this? Yeah, we wouldn't have one material. So I prefer just taking queens, because this simplification seems quite nice to me. Here I missed the simple b takes, and I forgot our opponent could take us as well. That happens. Instead we moved our king and got this. The pawns left the board, and we only had a slightly winning position here. Well, a 3 advantage is not just slight, but it was not 4 or 5. This was all good. Let's jump on back to this review as I mentioned. This was slightly inaccurate, although it does maintain our advantage. Largely so at least. This was good. The computer prefers going down, although it's quite similar in strength. I would like to stay here and keep centralized and stay close to our pawns. We got here. I didn't quite like bishop to f5. I thought I would like it to be defended by our king, because otherwise our opponent just kicks it around maybe. Although it's a permanent outpost, I guess. It can't be easily targeted unless we push our pawn. However, our way of winning here is probably just pushing our pawn. Like this. Which is why our bishop there was better, I think. Anyways, thanks a lot for the game, Enchekon from the UK. Thank you for watching to the end of the video, guys. This has been our game for today, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye!